Howdy there, Marty here, and we're back in this video with my top 5 favorite book reads of 2024.
I'm Foulmouth. F you, motherfucker. Quack.
Now, not to be mistaken, these aren't books that were published in 2024. I'm not even positive that I actually read any books that were published this year. I definitely read some graphic novels and comics and stuff. And you will notice on this list, it's actually void of graphic novels and comics. Not to say that I wouldn't have been willing to put one in my top 5, but I'm also excluding rereads. So the graphic novels and comics I read this year that would have been new to me, none of them really quite were deserving of the top 5 spots, so the top 5 themselves will be just books. Okay, my first official, which is funny because I make up the rules, so official, whatever. My first official honorable mention is going to be The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown. This was actually the book that kind of got me back into reading, which is sort of weird because I'm not a big nonfiction reader, and it's ostensibly a nonfiction book. This book is about the journey of the Donner Party from, east to west, the Oregon Trail and all that, although they only took the Oregon Trail for the first half of their trip, hence their harrowing experience and the tragedy that befell them. The book itself is essentially told in kind of a novel format, and this was an incredible, fairly disturbing read. It's a little bit of a slow start, but once you kind of get into the weeds of it, when you really start to get to the meat, that was honestly not meant to be a pun. When you start to get to the meat of the story, it becomes very compelling, and it's amazing how much there is to tell when it comes to the Donner Party that doesn't involve like the cannibalism and being stranded in the snow and horrible suffering. There's a lot of suffering before they get to that suffering, which is what they're obviously best known for. Now we are going to move on to the top 5 reads of 2024 for me. And before we get into it, remember, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It really does mean a lot to me, and I would love to see your top 5 reads for 2024 down below as well. So let's get right into it. Coming in at number 5, we have The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I read this essentially not right after I finished Blood Meridian, but after finishing Blood Meridian, I really needed another Cormac book in my life, and this one is highly recommended. I also thought it would be a little bit of an easy read in terms of like the language and how dense it is. There's a lot of sparseness on the pages, which I actually like. I like the pacing of this book. Quite a rough experience. This book had me anxious on a number of occasions. It was very moving ultimately. I've never actually seen the movie. I knew the gist of it going in. But yeah, it's an incredible tale of a father and son essentially trying to make their way across America in a post-apocalyptic setting where the world is basically destroyed. I don't really want to get too deep into spoilers on any of the books in this story, but that's pretty much the premise. It's a little bit of a rough read, especially as a parent, but yeah, incredibly well told. I highly recommend it, so yes, it does crack in the top 5 reads of 2024 for me. Moving on. Coming in at number 4, we have A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This was the first year I decided to actually read A Christmas Carol. I've always loved the story. I like most versions of the films that I've seen. In particular, the George C. Scott version is my favorite version of the films. If you've seen any version of A Christmas Carol, you've essentially read the book, to be totally honest with you. Others might feel differently, but the book really doesn't have anything that the film versions have. And even some of the film versions add more to the story to flesh things out more, like I would say arguably the Alistair Sim version of A Christmas Carol. Coming in at number 4 is probably more based on my love of the story than technically the book itself. But because I finally read the book, I'm going to count it, and it does slightly edge out The Road personally. But yeah, it's an incredible read. So if you haven't read A Christmas Carol or seen any of the films, yeah, do yourself a favor. It's a really good Christmas time read. So yeah, that is number 4. Moving on. Coming in at number 3, we have Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Yes, this was also the first year I finally decided to read a Stephen King book, and I went with Pet Sematary as my first. I absolutely loved this book. This is another one that is a pretty rough experience as a parent, but it's incredibly well told. Those of you that don't know anything about it, the elevator pitch on this one is essentially about a family that moves to kind of a rural area of Maine. The lead character in this book is a doctor, and he's going to be taking over the doctor position at the University of Maine, I think it is. And anyhow, the crazy series of events that lead to horrible, ghoulish things occurring. I enjoyed this book quite a bit. So that is number 3 for the new books to me for 2024. Coming in at number 2 is, yes, another Cormac McCarthy book, and it is Blood Meridian. Blood Meridian was an amazing experience. This is literally the only book in my entire life, book, not counting graphic novels, that I finished the book and then I turned right back to page 1 and read it again. I did predominantly do my second read with the audiobook because my initial read was actually the Folio Society edition of the book up here, and I wanted to do a reread and actually annotate the book. I wasn't, of course, going to annotate and mark up my really nice folio edition because it's an absolutely beautiful edition of the book. And I really wanted to get this one under my belt. I absolutely love Westerns. And yeah, so I of course, I read it, and I read it twice, so I absolutely loved it. It's a hard book to recommend because it is quite challenging in terms of its language. This is essentially the story of a kid kind of just post-Civil War who basically gets caught up with a gang of scalp hunters kind of on the border of Texas and Mexico. At some point down the road, I will do a video on it because I do really want to talk about it. It just feels like I need to kind of put this one on the shelf for a little bit, and then we'll come back to it. Moving on. So coming in at number 1 on this list is a book that I didn't want to take down from up here. It is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Absolutely loved it. I just did a really big video on that, so if you really want my thoughts on Lonesome Dove, go watch that video. So, long story short, it's basically about a group of men who decide to drive a massive herd of cattle from southern Texas all the way up to Montana to essentially start settling Montana. So like I said, there is a ton to tackle in this book, and I don't really want to get into the weeds of it, but I will say this. In terms of its character work and its dialogue and its writing, I can't think of a book that is better in terms of character work than Lonesome Dove. There are certainly books that I think probably ultimately have more to say. Don't be scared off by the fact that it's a Western and it's an epic. It is quite long. Most versions of the book seem to be between 830 and 850 pages. It's a bit of a slog in that sense. It's a little bit of a slow burn. It took me about 150 to 200 pages to really get into it. But once you really get into the melody of the book and you start spending time with these characters, it's absolutely amazing. It's not much work to get through that book in spite of its fairly massive length. Well, that's pretty much going to do it for this one. I sure hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, go ahead and hit that like button. If you'd like to see more videos from me, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. As I always say, it makes me feel like I accomplished something, but otherwise, I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye.